There's a particular quiet that settles over a life after the work is done, after the children are grown, after the house that was once a bustling hub of hurried breakfasts and slammed doors falls silent. It's a quiet I had yearned for, a quiet I had earned. For 45 years, my husband, Arthur, and I had spoken of it. We called it the Someday Plan. A little cottage by the sea, a place where the loudest sound would be the gulls crying in the morning and the soft sigh of the tide going out at night. We'd saved every spare penny, folded them into a dream tucked away in a savings account that grew with painful slowness. Arthur never got to see our someday. He left me one crisp autumn morning, leaving a void that the city noise only seemed to amplify. So I took our dream and carried it for the both of us. At 72, I sold the family home, the brick and mortar that held all my memories, and I bought a small, weathered beach house on a stretch of coast in a place called Seacrest Bluff. It was perfect. It wasn't grand, but its bones were sturdy, and it smelled of salt and old wood and peace. I named it Arthur's Haven. The first week was everything I had ever imagined. I unpacked the boxes of my life, placing Arthur's favorite armchair so it faced the endless expanse of the ocean. I drank my tea on the porch, wrapped in his old woolen cardigan, and I watched the sun paint the water in strokes of gold and rose. I felt his presence in the gentle sea breeze, in the warmth of the sun on my face. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. It was a healing balm on a soul that had been stretched thin for decades. Then, I made the phone call I had been looking forward to. I called my son, Samuel. He was my only child, my pride and joy. When I told him I'd finally done it, that I was in our beach house, his voice was full of genuine happiness for me. "Oh, Mom, that's wonderful. Truly, you deserve it more than anyone." His words were a comfort, a validation. "I'd love to come and see it," he said. "Maybe this weekend?" Sarah and the kids would be thrilled. My heart swelled. Of course. This was part of the dream, too. To have my grandchildren, Lily and Tom, build sandcastles on the shore, to see their faces light up at the sight of a passing ship. "I would love that more than anything, darling," I told him, my voice thick with emotion. I spent the next 2 days preparing. I baked his favorite lemon drizzle cake. I bought colorful buckets and spades. I made up the spare bedroom with the fresh, line-dried sheets that smelled of sea air. I envisioned quiet, happy days. Reading stories to the children, walking along the beach collecting shells, enjoying simple meals together as a family. I was imagining the dream expanding, not breaking. On Friday afternoon, I stood on my porch, watching the road. A car appeared, then another one right behind it. My brow furrowed for a moment. Samuel's car pulled into my small, gravel driveway, and he got out beaming. Sarah, his wife, followed. Then Lily and Tom tumbled out, shouting "Grandma" and rushing toward me. I knelt to hug them, my heart bursting with love. But then the second car door opened. A woman I vaguely recognized as Sarah's sister, Clara, emerged, along with her husband, Mark, and their 3 boisterous children. Samuel walked over, his arms sweeping out in a grand gesture. "Mom, surprise. Clara and Mark were free this weekend, so we all decided to make a big trip of it. Isn't this great?" He was smiling, so pleased with himself. I felt a smile stretch across my own face, a thin, papery thing that didn't quite reach my eyes. How lovely, I managed to say, as 9 extra people, 7 of them children, descended upon Arthur's Haven. The quiet was the first casualty. It was shattered instantly, replaced by a cacophony of shrieks, laughter, and the thud of suitcases being dropped in my hallway. My little cottage, designed for the peaceful contemplation of 1 or 2, suddenly felt as though its walls were straining. The lemon drizzle cake I'd baked for Samuel was devoured in less than 10 minutes, mostly by children who barely registered what they were eating before demanding something else. The buckets and spades were immediately fought over. Sand, which I had lovingly brushed from my porch, was tracked in with abandon, creating a gritty layer over my polished wooden floors. The spare bedroom, meant for Samuel and Sarah, was quickly claimed by Clara and her family because they had more children. Samuel and Sarah took my bedroom, my sanctuary, because it had the ensuite bathroom. And I, Alara, the owner of the house, was relegated to the small, lumpy sofa in the living room. I told myself it was fine. It was just for a weekend. I was a mother, a grandmother. This is what you do. You accommodate. You make space. But as I lay there that first night, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of my house, the creak of floorboards from people who didn't know their gentle spots, the muffled sound of a television in my own bedroom, the flush of a toilet every half hour, I felt a profound sense of dislocation. This wasn't my home anymore. It was a free-for-all holiday rental where I was the unpaid, live-in staff. The next morning, I was up at dawn, my back aching from the sofa. The house was finally quiet. I slipped out onto the porch with my cup of tea, desperate to reclaim a sliver of my dream. The sunrise was spectacular, a blaze of orange and purple over a calm sea. For a few precious moments, it was just me, the ocean, and the memory of Arthur. Then the sliding door crashed open. "Oh, good, you're up," Sarah said, yawning. She didn't seem to notice the sunrise. "The kids are hungry. Is there any cereal? And the coffee maker, I can't figure it out." I spent the next 2 hours making breakfast for 11 people. Pancakes, eggs, toast. The requests were endless. I felt like a short-order cook in a bustling diner. No one offered to help. They milled around the kitchen, getting in my way, making more mess. Samuel finally came downstairs around 9. "Smells amazing, Mum," he said, ruffling my hair as he passed, a gesture he hadn't made since he was a teenager. He grabbed a plate and loaded it high. He ate standing up, talking to Mark about football. He didn't look at me. He didn't say thank you. He just consumed. And in that moment, I felt a chasm open between the son I loved and the man who stood in my kitchen. He didn't see me. He saw a service. A provider. A role I had played his whole life, a role I thought I had finally earned the right to retire from. The weekend blurred into a montage of chaos. The children used my collection of antique sea glass for a skipping stone competition. My small library of classic books, which I had so lovingly arranged, were pulled from the shelves and left with bent spines and sandy pages. The television was on constantly, tuned to loud cartoons or sports channels. My quiet afternoons, which I had pictured spending with a novel and the sound of the waves, were instead spent mediating arguments over toys, cleaning up spilled juice, and doing endless loads of laundry filled with wet, sandy clothes. I tried to connect. I suggested a family walk along the beach. "Oh, it's a bit windy, Mom," Sarah said, scrolling on her phone. I offered to teach Lily how to identify different shells. She was more interested in a game on her tablet. I felt invisible, a ghost in my own dream. I would find myself standing in a corner of the living room, a room full of my family, and feel utterly, profoundly alone. They were not sharing my dream with me. They were consuming it, oblivious to the fact that it was mine. On Sunday afternoon, as they were finally, mercifully, packing up to leave, Samuel found me on the porch. The house behind me was a disaster zone. There were wet towels draped over my furniture, a pile of rubbish bags by the door, and the floor was crunchy with sand and biscuit crumbs. I was exhausted. Not just physically, but emotionally. My spirit felt as heavy as a waterlogged sail. "That was fantastic, Mom," Samuel said, his face glowing with a weekend of relaxation. "The place is amazing. Just perfect for a getaway." I nodded, unable to summon the energy to speak. He seemed to sense my lack of enthusiasm, but he misinterpreted it. "You look tired. You should rest." He patted my shoulder. Then came the words that made my blood run cold. "Listen, a few of my mates from work were asking what I was doing this weekend. When I told them about your place, they were so jealous. We were thinking, maybe we could all come down for a long weekend in a few weeks. Just the guys. It would be epic. We'd be out of your hair, probably be fishing most of the time." He said it so casually, so thoughtlessly, as if he were booking a room at a hotel chain, not asking to invade his elderly mother's newfound sanctuary with a group of his friends. He didn't see the flicker of pain in my eyes. He didn't see the way my hands, resting on the porch railing, trembled slightly. He just saw the house. A resource. A commodity. An extension of him. "What do you think?" he asked, already smiling at the thought of it. For a long moment, I just stared out at the ocean. I watched a wave build, rise, and crash against the shore. And in its relentless, unstoppable power, I found a reflection of the feeling that was building inside me. A feeling that had been dormant for a very long time. It was a quiet, resolute strength. I turned to him, and I gave him another one of those thin, papery smiles. "Let me think about it, darling," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "I'll surprise you." He beamed, clapped me on the shoulder again, and jogged back to his car, oblivious. He thought my surprise would be a yes. He had no idea what was coming. After they left, the silence that descended on the house was different. It wasn't the peaceful, fulfilling silence of my first week. It was a hollow, echoing silence, filled with the ghosts of the weekend's chaos. I walked through the rooms, my heart aching. I picked up a book with a torn cover. I swept up a mountain of sand. I found a half-eaten lollipop stuck to the cushion of Arthur's armchair. Each discovery was a small, sharp stab of grief. This wasn't Arthur's haven anymore. It had been violated, disrespected. And the worst part was, it had been done by my own son, the person I loved most in the world. I collapsed into Arthur's chair, the sticky patch from the lollipop making me flinch, and I finally let myself cry. I cried for Arthur, who would have known exactly what to say. He would have handled it with his gentle firmness, setting boundaries without ever raising his voice. I cried for the dream that had been so quickly tarnished. And I cried for myself, for the woman who had spent her entire life putting others first, only to find that in her one moment of claiming something for herself, she was expected to continue doing the same. The tears were not a sign of weakness. They were a cleansing. A tide washing away the hurt and leaving behind a hard, clear resolution. I would not let this happen again. I would not become a doormat in my own home. I had not worked and saved and sacrificed for my entire life to become the unpaid manager of a seaside resort for my entitled family and their friends. My surprise for Samuel would not be malicious. It would not be born of anger. It would be born of love. A tough, necessary love. The kind of love that teaches a lesson not to punish, but to enlighten. The first thing I did was sit down at my small writing desk, the one I had placed by the window overlooking the sea. I took out a piece of my best stationery, the thick, creamy paper I saved for important letters. And I began to write. I wrote for hours. I poured my heart onto that page, not with accusations, but with honest, vulnerable truth. I told Samuel about the dream, his father's dream, our dream. I described the 45 years of saving, the small joys we'd given up, the old car we drove for a decade longer than we should have, the holidays we never took. I wanted him to understand that this house wasn't just a property I had acquired. It was the culmination of a lifetime. I wrote about my first week here, the profound peace, the feeling of finally coming home to myself. Then, gently, I wrote about his visit. I didn't blame him. I used I statements. I felt invisible when the house filled with noise. I felt like a service provider rather than a mother and a grandmother. I felt my dream slipping away when I was sleeping on the sofa while my own bed was occupied. I told him that I loved him and his family more than words could say, but that my role as a constant, on-demand caregiver had ended. It was a role I had cherished, but it was now my time to be cherished, to be respected, to be quiet. I explained that Arthur's haven was my home, not a hotel. It was a place for peace and reflection. It was a legacy for him and his children, a place they could one day inherit, but only if its soul was preserved. It could not be a party house. It could not be a flop house for his friends. I folded the letter and placed it in an envelope. I labeled it, "For Samuel," to be read when you arrive. The next part of my plan required a bit of courage. I spent a day deep cleaning the house, exorcising the last remnants of the chaotic weekend. I polished the floors until they gleamed. I washed every sheet, every towel. I reorganized my books. I sat in Arthur's chair, which was now clean, and I reclaimed my space. I made it mine again. Then I packed a small overnight bag. I packed my favorite novel, a warm scarf, and the small, framed photo of Arthur that I kept on my bedside table. I looked up a bed and breakfast in a small fishing village about an hour's drive down the coast. It was a place I had always wanted to explore but had never had the time. I booked a room for 3 nights, starting on the Friday that Samuel and his friends were planning to arrive. My final preparation was to create a new house document. I typed it up, printed it, and had it laminated at the local library. I titled it, "Welcome to Arthur's Haven, a guide for cherished guests." It was a simple 1-page document. It started with a warm welcome, expressing my joy at sharing my home with loved ones. But then it laid out the house truths, as I called them. Asterisk truth number 1. This is a home, not a hotel. It is a place of peace and rest. Please treat it with the gentleness and respect you would your own most treasured space. Asterisk truth number 2. Alara is the homeowner, not the housekeeper. She is here to share her time with you, not to serve you. Please clean up after yourselves, contribute to meal preparation, and leave the space as you found it. Asterisk truth number 3. The quiet hours are from 10 p.m. to 8 a.m. The ocean provides all the music we need. Asterisk truth number 4. The guest list is sacred. The house can comfortably accommodate a maximum of 4 guests at a time. All visits must be arranged with Alara directly, well in advance. No unexpected surprise guests will be accommodated. I placed this laminated sheet on the small table in the entryway, right where everyone would see it. Finally, on that Friday morning, 2 weeks after the first invasion, I placed the letter for Samuel in the middle of the kitchen table. I took one last look around my pristine, quiet cottage. It felt good. It felt right. I picked up my bag, locked the front door, and for the first time in my life, I chose my own peace over someone else's expectations. I drove away from my dream house, not with a sense of loss, but with a feeling of profound, liberating empowerment. I was going to let the house, the letter, and the silence do the talking for me. The drive along the coast was beautiful. The sun was shining, and the sea was a brilliant, sparkling blue. I had the windows down, and the salty air felt like a baptism. With every mile I put between myself and Seacrest Bluff, a weight I hadn't even fully realized I was carrying began to lift. I wasn't running away, I was running towards myself. The bed and breakfast was a charming, ivy-covered building run by a woman about my age named Margaret. She had a kind, knowing smile. My room was small and cozy, with a window that looked out over a bustling little harbor filled with colorful fishing boats. It was a different kind of seaside view, one full of life and work, and I found it fascinating. That evening, I didn't have to cook for anyone. I didn't have to clean up after anyone. I went to a small pub on the harbor, sat at a table by myself, and ordered a plate of the freshest fish and chips I had ever tasted. I watched the fishermen mending their nets. I listened to the lively chatter of the locals, and I felt a sense of contentment that was deep and pure. I was an individual, a person in the world, not just a role I played for others. I thought about Samuel. I pictured him arriving at the house with his friends, full of boisterous energy. I imagined him walking in, calling out for me. The silence. The discovery of the empty, spotless house. The letter sitting on the table. I felt a pang of a mother's anxiety. Would he be angry? Would he feel rejected? But I pushed the feeling down. This was a necessary pain, the kind that accompanies growth. He was a good man, my Samuel. He was just, thoughtless. He had slipped into a pattern established in his childhood, a pattern I had never challenged. Now, I was challenging it. I spent the next day exploring. I walked through the narrow, cobbled streets of the fishing village. I browsed in tiny shops filled with handmade pottery and local art. I sat on a bench overlooking the harbor, and I read my book for 3 uninterrupted hours. No one asked me for a snack. No one turned on a loud television. It was blissful. Around 4 in the afternoon, my phone rang. It was Samuel. My heart gave a little jump, but I took a deep, calming breath before I answered. "Hello, darling," I said, my voice even. There was a long pause on the other end of the line. When he finally spoke, his voice was small, choked. "Mom, I'm here. At the house. I read your letter." I waited, letting the silence stretch. This was his moment, not mine. "Oh, Mom," he said, and I could hear the tears in his voice now. "I am so sorry. I had no idea. I never thought. I'm such an idiot." The words tumbled out of him, a torrent of regret and shame. My friends are here. I read them parts of your letter. They're packing up. We're leaving. God, Mom, I feel awful. I treated your home like a frat house. I treated you like... I don't even know what. I just took it all for granted. You, the house, everything. I listened, my own eyes welling up. This was more than I could have hoped for. It wasn't anger. It was true, heartfelt remorse. Where are you? He asked, his voice full of concern. Are you all right? I'm more than all right, Samuel, I said, and for the first time, I let the warmth and love flood my voice. I'm wonderful. I'm in a little village called Port Isaac. I'm having an adventure. There was another pause. I could almost hear the gears turning in his head, the dawning of a new understanding. I wasn't a fragile old woman who had run away, hurt. I was a capable, independent person who had taken control of her life. An adventure, he repeated softly. Good for you, Mom. You deserve one. We talked for a long time. He told me he had also seen the laminated House Truths. He said reading it made his stomach sink. It was all so simple, so reasonable. He couldn't believe he had needed it spelled out for him. He apologized again and again, not just for this weekend, but for the one before. He admitted he hadn't even noticed I was sleeping on the sofa. The admission hung in the air between us, a testament to his complete and utter obliviousness. But he wasn't oblivious anymore. When are you coming home? He asked. I'll be back on Sunday afternoon, I told him. I've booked my room until then. Okay, he said. Okay. Mom, I love you, and I'm proud of you. That was it. That was the moment my heart healed completely. He was proud of me for standing up for myself. To him. I returned to Arthur's Haven on Sunday to a house that was as pristine as I had left it. But there was something new. On the kitchen table, where my letter had been, there was now a large bouquet of my favorite flowers, freesias, and a new, hardback copy of the book that had its cover torn. Beside it was a note, in Samuel's familiar scrawl. It said, "Welcome home, Mum, to your haven. Let's start again." And we did. The dynamic of our relationship shifted that day. The parent-child roles began to dissolve, replaced by a mutual respect between two adults. The following month, Samuel called. "Hi, Mum," he said. "I was wondering, and please say no if it's not a good time, but would it be possible for me, Sarah, Lily, and Tom to come and visit you for a weekend? We would love to spend some proper time with you." The way he asked, the hesitation in his voice, the respect for my answer, it was everything. "I would love that, darling," I said, my heart full. When they came, it was a world away from their first visit. They arrived with bags of groceries. Sarah immediately started helping me in the kitchen. Samuel took Tom for a long walk on the beach to get his energy out. Lily sat with me on the porch, and this time, she left her tablet inside. "Grandma," she said, her small hand in mine, "can you teach me about the shells now?" I spent the afternoon with my granddaughter, our heads bent together over a collection of whelks and cockles, their names and stories passing from my generation to hers. Samuel and I took a walk at sunset, just the two of us. He held my arm, not to support a frail, old woman, but as a companion. "I'm sorry it took me so long to see you, Mom," he said, looking out at the horizon. "Not just to look at you, but to really see you." I squeezed his arm. "You see me now. That's all that matters." The house is quiet again now, but it's the right kind of quiet. It's a quiet that gets punctuated by the right kind of noise, by visits that are arranged with love and respect, by the laughter of my grandchildren as they learn about the sea, by heartfelt conversations on the porch. My dream wasn't broken. It was just tested. It had to be broken open a little to let a new, more honest light in. I have my solitude, my peace, my ocean. I have Arthur's Haven. But it's no longer just a haven for his memory and my peace. It's become a haven for my family, too. A place where they come not to take, but to share. A place where they see me, Alara, not as a function, but as the heart of the home. And as I sit here now, in Arthur's chair, watching the evening tide roll in, I know that this, right here, is the surprise I was meant to have all along. The surprise of a dream that turned out to be even better, even richer, than the one I had carried in my heart for 45 years. The seasons turn, even by the sea. The vibrant, almost boisterous blue of summer slowly gives way to the deeper, more contemplative slate gray of autumn. The tourists vanish, the coastline empties, and the wind carries a new chill, a whisper of the winter to come. It was in this quiet, introspective time that my new life, the one I had fought for and won, truly settled into its rhythm. The chaos of that first visit from my son, Samuel, felt like a distant storm, a tempest that had passed and left the air clean and clear. Our relationship had been reborn. His visits with Sarah and the children were now gentle affairs, built on a foundation of respect I hadn't realized was missing until it was finally there. They brought their own food, they cleaned up their own messes, and most importantly, they came to be with me, not just to be at my house. We'd spend hours on the porch, talking. Really talking. He asked about my life, about my week, about my thoughts. He was seeing me, Alara, the woman, not just Mum, the institution. And in the long, peaceful stretches between their visits, I found a new kind of joy. I made friends in the village. I joined a small book club that met in the local library. I took up watercolor painting, setting up my easel on the porch to capture the ever-changing moods of the ocean. My life was full, not with the frantic energy of raising a family, but with the quiet, deliberate fullness of a life being lived for oneself. I felt strong. I felt content. I felt permanent, as if I had finally sunk roots into the sandy soil of my own existence. But life, much like the sea, has a way of reminding you that nothing is truly permanent. The tides of fortune can turn when you least expect it. It happened on a Tuesday in late October. The air was crisp, and the sky was a brilliant, cloudless blue. The sea was unusually calm, like a vast sheet of polished glass. I decided to take a longer walk than usual, venturing further down the beach towards a rocky outcrop I had been meaning to explore. I felt vigorous, my boots crunching satisfyingly on the damp sand. I was thinking of Arthur, as I often did on these walks. I imagined him walking beside me, his hand in mine, his quiet presence a comforting weight. I was so lost in the memory, so wrapped in the beauty of the day, that I didn't see the patch of wet, slick seaweed clinging to a flat rock in my path. My foot slipped. One moment I was striding forward, the next I was falling, my body twisting in a clumsy, awkward arc. The landing was a brutal shock of pain. A sharp, searing agony shot up from my hip, so intense it stole my breath. I lay there on the sand, the cold dampness seeping through my coat, the sky spinning above me. The pain was a living thing, a hot, vicious creature with its teeth sunk deep into my bone. I tried to move, to push myself up, but another wave of agony, white-hot and nauseating, slammed through me. I was alone. The beach was deserted. My phone was in my pocket, but I couldn't seem to coordinate my limbs to reach it. Panic, cold and sharp, began to prick at the edges of my pain-filled consciousness. It was the ultimate fear of anyone living alone, to be helpless, to be broken, with no one to hear you call. I don't know how long I lay there. Time seemed to stretch and warp. The sun felt less warm. The sound of the gentle waves lapping the shore seemed to mock my immobility. Eventually, a voice cut through the fog. "Ma'am, are you all right?" A young man with a dog on a lead was standing over me, his face a mask of concern. Tears of relief streamed down my face. I couldn't speak. I could only point weakly to my hip. The rest is a blur of efficiency and kindness. The young man, whose name I later learned was Ben, called for an ambulance. He sat with me, talking in a low, soothing voice, his dog licking my hand, until the paramedics arrived. The journey to the hospital was a symphony of sirens and bumps, each one sending a fresh jolt of pain through my body. Lying on the gurney, staring up at the sterile ceiling of the ambulance, I felt a profound sense of failure. My hard-won independence, my beautiful, solitary life, had been shattered by a patch of slippery seaweed. The dream of Arthur's haven felt like it was dissolving, like a sandcastle washed away by an unexpected wave. The hospital was a world of harsh lights, antiseptic smells, and the constant, disembodied beeping of machines. It was the antithesis of my home. Here, I wasn't Alara. I was the fractured hip in room 3B. I was a chart, a set of vitals, a case to be managed. The doctors confirmed what I already knew in my bones, a clean break high up on the femur. It would require surgery, pins, and a long, arduous period of recovery. After they had stabilized me and given me something that dulled the sharpest edges of the pain, a nurse kindly helped me call Samuel. His voice, when he answered, was its usual cheerful self. "Hi, Mom. How are you?" The simple question broke me. The dam of my carefully constructed composure crumbled, and I began to sob, a messy, heartbroken sound that I hadn't made in years. "Mom? Mom, what is it? What's wrong?" I explained, through my tears, what had happened. The silence on the other end of the line was heavy. I could picture him, the color draining from his face, his mind racing. "I'm on my way," he said, his voice now tight with a controlled urgency. "Don't you worry about a thing. I'll be there in a few hours. We'll figure this all out. We'll figure this all out." The words were meant to be a comfort, but they sent a chill of apprehension through me. I knew my son. His way of figuring things out was to take charge, to manage, to solve. I had just spent months teaching him that I didn't need to be managed, and now, in my moment of greatest vulnerability, I feared that lesson would be forgotten. He arrived late that night, his face etched with worry. Sarah was with him. Seeing them, my heart swelled with love and gratitude, but it was tangled with a fierce, protective instinct towards my own autonomy. They fussed over me. They spoke to the nurses. They demanded to see the doctor. Samuel was in full protective son mode. The next morning, after I had been seen by the orthopedic surgeon, Samuel asked to speak with me alone. He pulled a chair close to my bed, his expression serious. "Mom," he began, taking my hand. "We need to talk about what comes next." I braced myself. The surgeon was very clear. "This is a long recovery. Months. You won't be able to put weight on that leg for at least 6 weeks. You're going to need round-the-clock care, at least initially." I nodded. "I know, darling. I'll hire a home care nurse. I've got my savings. I can manage." Samuel shook his head, a look of deep concern on his face. "Mom, that's not enough. You'll be alone all night. What if you fall again? The house, it's isolated. It's not practical for someone in your condition." He took a deep breath, and then he said the words I had been dreading. "Sarah and I have been talking. We think the best thing to do is to sell the beach house." The words hung in the sterile air of the hospital room, more painful than the ache in my hip. Sell Arthur's Haven. The culmination of my life's dream, the sanctuary I had just reclaimed, the place where I felt closest to my late husband. It felt like he was suggesting an amputation of my very soul. "No," I said, my voice quiet but firm. "Absolutely not." "Mom, be reasonable," he pleaded. "It's just a house. Your health is more important. You can come and live with us. We'll convert the downstairs study into a bedroom for you. You'll be safe. We can take care of you." He was trying to be kind. He was trying to be a good son. He thought he was offering a solution. But what I heard was a life sentence. A return to being a dependent, an accessory in someone else's life. I would lose my home, my friends, my independence, my ocean. I would lose myself. "It is not just a house, Samuel," I said, my voice gaining strength. "It is my home. It is your father's legacy. It is the only place on this earth I want to be. Selling it is not an option." We argued. It was not a loud, angry argument, but a tense, painful negotiation of love and fear. He saw my insistence as stubbornness, a refusal to accept reality. I saw his solution as a betrayal of everything we had just built. He couldn't understand that the house wasn't the problem. It was the cure. The thought of recovering there, of being able to sit on my porch and watch the waves, was the one thing giving me the strength to face the surgery and the rehabilitation. Taking that away would be taking away my will to heal. "I am not going to live in your study," I said, my eyes locking with his. "I am going home. To my home. And I will do whatever it takes to make that happen. This is not up for discussion." He stared at me, his face a mixture of frustration and hurt. He saw his offer of care and safety being thrown back in his face. He didn't understand that I wasn't rejecting his love, I was rejecting his control. In that moment, I realized this was my next surprise for him. My first surprise had been to teach him how to respect my independence when I was strong. This second surprise would be to teach him how to respect it when I was weak. The surgery went well. The days that followed were a blur of pain management, physical therapy, and the quiet humiliation of needing help for the most basic tasks. Samuel and Sarah were a constant presence, their love a warm blanket, but their anxieties were a suffocating weight. The conversations about my future continued, a low, constant hum beneath the surface of everything. They researched assisted living facilities. They spoke to real estate agents just to get an idea of the market. Each mention felt like a small act of violence against my spirit. I knew I had to do something drastic. I waited until the physical therapist gave me a good report. I waited until I could sit up in a chair for an hour without feeling faint. Then I called a family meeting. Samuel, Sarah, and me in my hospital room. "I love you both more than words can say," I began, my voice steady. "And I am so grateful for your care. But you are not listening to me. My mind is not broken, and my spirit is not broken. Only my hip, and it will heal. I have made a decision. I am hiring a live-in recovery nurse for the first 6 weeks. I am having the house assessed for any necessary modifications. And I am going home at the end of next week." Samuel started to protest, but I held up my hand. "This is my decision, Samuel. As a capable, intelligent adult. Your job is not to overrule me. Your job is to support me. You can either help me go home, or you can stand in my way. But either way, I am going home." Sarah, who had been quiet until now, spoke up. "Ilara," she said softly, her eyes full of genuine concern. "We are just so scared of something happening to you." "I know, my dear," I said, my voice softening. "And I am scared too. But being scared is not a reason to give up your life. True safety isn't about eliminating all risk. It's about having a place where your soul feels safe. And my soul is only safe in one place. At Arthur's Haven." There was a long silence. Samuel looked at Sarah, then back at me. I saw a flicker of understanding in his eyes, a memory of our conversation on the porch months ago. He was finally starting to see. This wasn't about a house. This was about my identity. "Okay, Mom," he said, letting out a long, slow breath. "Okay, we'll help you go home." The journey back to Seacrest Bluff was the opposite of my first, triumphant drive. This time, I was a passenger, lying awkwardly in the back of Samuel's large car, my leg propped up on cushions. Every bump was a reminder of my fragility. The arrival was even harder. My son, strong and capable, carried me from the car to the front door, just as he had been carried by his father as a sleeping child. The indignity of it stung. Inside, the house felt alien. There was a hospital bed in the living room, positioned to face the sea view. My beloved Arthur's chair had been pushed into a corner. There were grab bars newly installed in the bathroom and a commode chair that made me want to weep with shame. The house had been modified for an invalid, and I felt like one. The first few weeks were a living nightmare. I was trapped in the living room, a prisoner in my own paradise. My live-in nurse, a kind but brisk woman named Carol, managed my medications and my exercises. But she was a stranger. Her presence, while necessary, was an intrusion into the sacred quiet of my home. I could hear the ocean, but I couldn't feel the sea spray on my face. I could see the porch, but I couldn't sit on it. I was closer than ever to my dream, and yet I had never felt further away from it. Samuel and Sarah were wonderful. They took turns staying, sleeping on the lumpy sofa I had once been relegated to. They cooked, they cleaned, they read to me. But their very presence was a constant reminder of my dependence. Samuel would look at me with such pity in his eyes, and I hated it. I didn't want his pity. I wanted his respect. The hardest part was the battle in my own mind. There were dark days when the pain was bad and my progress felt non-existent. In those moments, Samuel's voice would echo in my head. Maybe we should sell the house. Come live with us. The temptation to surrender, to give in to the easy path, was immense. To let someone else take care of everything. But then I would look out the window. I would see a storm roll in over the water, the waves crashing with magnificent fury. I would see the sun break through the clouds, turning the sea to molten silver. And I would remember why I was fighting. I was fighting for this. For the right to witness this beauty from my own home, on my own terms. Slowly, painstakingly, I began to heal. The first time I stood on my own 2 feet with the help of a walker was a victory as great as any I had ever known. The first time I was able to shuffle my way onto the porch and sit in a chair, wrapped in a blanket, breathing in the real, unfiltered sea air, I cried with gratitude. Each small step was a reclamation. I was taking back my life, one painful inch at a time. Samuel witnessed this transformation. He saw my grim determination during my physical therapy exercises. He saw the joy on my face the first time I was able to butter my own toast. He started to see not a frail, helpless mother, but a warrior. His pity began to morph back into respect, tinged with a new, profound admiration. His help changed too. It became less about doing things for me and more about empowering me to do them for myself. He didn't just bring me a cup of tea. He would ask, "Mom, do you feel up to walking with me to the kitchen to make some tea?" He built me a sturdy wooden ramp for the porch steps, not as a permanent fixture for an invalid, but as a temporary bridge back to my independence. One afternoon, about 2 months after my fall, he sat with me on the porch. I was in a wheelchair now, but I was outside. "You were right, Mom," he said, his gaze fixed on the horizon. "I wanted to wrap you in cotton wool and lock you away to keep you safe. But I would have suffocated you. I see that now." "You were acting out of love, Samuel," I said, reaching for his hand. "I know. But love isn't about making people fit into your idea of what's safe," he replied, his grip firm. "It's about helping them be who they are, wherever they are. Even if it scares the hell out of you." That was the moment. The true culmination of my second, unspoken surprise. He finally, truly understood. He had learned to respect my strength, and now he had learned to respect my struggle. He had learned to love me not just for what I could do for him, or for my resilience, but for the fierce, stubborn, independent woman I was, in both strength and in fragility. My recovery continued. The nurse left. The hospital bed was returned. I moved from a walker to a cane. And one day, in the early spring, 6 months after my fall, I did something I had dreamed of every single day. I left my cane on the porch, and I walked slowly, unsteadily, but on my own, down the ramp and onto the sand. The beach was firm near the water's edge. I walked towards the waves, my heart pounding with effort and emotion. I stood there, letting the cool water swirl around my ankles, and I looked back at my house. Arthur's Haven. It looked the same. A small, weathered cottage against a vast sky. But it was different. We were different. We had been broken and put back together again, stronger in the fractured places. My dream of a quiet retirement had been a lovely, simple watercolor. But my reality was a rich, complex oil painting with deep shadows and brilliant highlights, textured with pain and joy, struggle and triumph. It was so much more beautiful, so much more real. I had bought a house to enjoy my retirement, but I had learned that enjoyment isn't a passive state. It's an active fight. It's the will to reclaim your life, day after day. It's the courage to face the waves, even when you are afraid they might knock you down. And it's the wisdom to know that a true haven isn't a place where you hide from life, but a place that gives you the strength to live it. The spring that followed my recovery was a season of quiet rebirth, both for the world outside my window and for the world within me. The trauma of the fall receded, leaving behind not a scar of fear, but a deep, unshakable knowledge of my own resilience. My cane, once a symbol of my dependency, now leaned in a corner of the porch, a silent testament to a battle won. I had stared into the abyss of losing everything: my home, my independence, myself, and I had not blinked. I had fought my way back. The haven I had built for Arthur's memory had, in turn, become my fortress, the place that had saved me. My days resumed their peaceful rhythm, but it was a new kind of peace, one forged in fire, not merely found. My watercolor paintings became bolder, my strokes more confident. I captured the fierce beauty of a storm-tossed sea with the same love I gave the placid sunsets. In my book club, I found my voice, arguing passionately for the heroines who were stubborn, who were difficult, who refused to be swept away by the expectations of others. My friendship with Margaret, the owner of the bed and breakfast where I had taken refuge, deepened. We would meet for tea, two women in the autumn of our lives, sharing stories and laughter, finding kinship in our shared understanding that independence was not about being alone, but about being whole on your own. My relationship with Samuel had settled into a beautiful, easy grace. Our phone calls were no longer fraught with his worry or my defensiveness. They were simply conversations, a son and a mother checking in, sharing the small details of their days. His visits were a joy. He seemed to have a newfound appreciation for the quiet. He would sit with me on the porch for an hour in comfortable silence, just watching the gulls. He was learning the language of the sea, the language of stillness, which I now knew was the language of the soul. He saw the strength in me now, not just the stubbornness. He understood that my fight to stay here wasn't a rejection of him, but an embrace of myself. Life was good. It was simple and profound. I had my home, my health, my friends, and a son who finally, truly saw me. I believed I had faced my last great surprise, that the rest of my days would be a gentle, predictable tide, ebbing and flowing with the seasons. I had forgotten that the ocean always has one more wave, one more unexpected current, waiting just out of sight. It happened on a Thursday afternoon. I was cleaning my paintbrushes, the scent of turpentine mingling with the salty air, when the phone rang. It was Samuel. "Hi, Mom," he said. His voice was flat, hollow. All the usual warmth and energy was gone. It was a voice I hadn't heard in years, a voice that belonged to a much younger man who had just had his heart broken for the first time. "Samuel, is everything all right?" I asked, my own heart giving a sudden, anxious lurch. "Yeah, fine," he said, the lie hanging empty in the air between us. There was a pause, a crackle on the line. Then, would it be all right if I came down for a couple of days? Just me. Just him. Not Sarah, not the children. The request was a flare in the dark. Something was terribly wrong. My mind raced through 100 terrible possibilities. "Of course, darling," I said, keeping my voice calm, even. "The house is always here for you. When will you be here?" "I'll leave now," he said. "I'll be there tonight." He hung up before I could ask another question. I stood there, the paintbrush dripping turquoise onto the floorboards, a sense of dread coiling in my stomach. The protector, the fixer, my capable, confident son, was coming to my haven not as a support, but because he needed refuge. The roles were about to be reversed in a way I had never anticipated. I spent the afternoon preparing, but this time it was different. I wasn't baking a cake or buying toys. I was shoring up my own emotional defenses. I was preparing to be an anchor in his storm. I made up the spare room, the one he and his family now used with such respect. I made a simple soup. I sat on the porch and I watched the sun go down, and I gathered all the strength I had, all the wisdom I had earned through my own trials, and I waited. He arrived long after dark. The man who got out of the car was a stranger. His shoulders were slumped. His face was pale and drawn. He walked like he was carrying an immense, invisible weight. He came into the house, dropped his bag in the hall, and just stood there, looking lost. I didn't rush to him. I didn't flood him with questions. I remembered what it was like to be broken, to be raw. I simply walked over, put my arms around my tall son, and held him. For a long moment, he was stiff, resistant. Then a shudder went through his whole body, and he sagged against me, his head on my shoulder. He was 45 years old, a husband, a father, a successful man. And in that moment, he was just my boy, and he was hurting. "I lost my job, Mum," he whispered into my cardigan, the words muffled and thick with unshed tears. We didn't talk about it that night. I gave him a bowl of soup, which he barely touched. I made him a cup of tea, and we sat in the living room, in the soft light of a single lamp. I didn't offer platitudes. I didn't say, "Everything will be all right." I knew from my own dark days that those words can feel like a dismissal of your pain. Instead, I just sat with him. I offered him the gift of my quiet presence, a space where he didn't have to perform, where he didn't have to be strong, where he could just be. Eventually, his exhaustion overtook him, and he went to bed. I stayed up late, sitting in Arthur's chair, looking out at the dark, invisible ocean. I thought about how for his entire life, Samuel's identity had been wrapped up in his success, in his role as a provider, a problem solver. It was the same trap I had been in, my identity consumed by the role of mother. Now his role had been stripped away, and he was adrift, just as I would have been if I had let him sell my house and move me into his study. The next morning, I was up at dawn. I made coffee and took 2 mugs out to the porch. He was already there, wrapped in a blanket, staring out at the gray, misty sea. He looked like he hadn't slept at all. I handed him a mug, and we stood in silence for a long time, watching the world slowly come to light. "They're downsizing," he finally said, his voice raw. "A merger. My whole division is gone. 20 years with the company, and I'm gone." Just like that. An email and a box for my desk. He spoke to the ocean, not to me. I haven't told Sarah yet. Or the kids. How do I even? How do I tell them their father is a failure? "Is that what you are?" I asked softly. He finally turned to look at me, his eyes full of a pain that was deeper than just unemployment. It was a crisis of self, isn't it? My one job is to provide for them, to be the rock. And I've failed. I feel useless. Like my whole life has been a waste. I took a sip of my coffee, gathering my thoughts. This was the moment. This was the conversation that all our struggles had been leading to. When your father and I were saving for this house, I began, my voice steady. There were times when it felt impossible. Arthur lost his job once, back in the 80s. A recession. He was devastated, just like you are now. He felt like he had failed us. Samuel looked at me surprised. He never told me that. He wouldn't have, I said. It was his great shame. He spent weeks just wandering the house, lost. He thought his value was tied to his paycheck. He thought that was his whole story. But I knew better. His job was what he did. It wasn't who he was. Who he was the man who taught you how to ride a bike. The man who could fix anything with a bit of wire and some patience. The man who sat with me night after night and dreamed of a house by the sea. That was his real work. The job was just the thing that paid for it. I put my mug down and looked him straight in the eye. "You are not a failure, Samuel. You are a man who has lost a job. It is a terrible, painful thing. But it is not the end of your story. It is a chapter. It is not the whole book. Your work is being a father who teaches his daughter about the stars. It's being a husband who makes his wife laugh. It's being a son who learns to see his mother as a whole person. That is your life's work. The other thing, it was just a job." Tears were silently streaming down his face now. He wasn't trying to hide them. He was just letting them fall. I had given him permission to be broken. We walked on the beach later that day. He talked for hours, pouring out all his fears, his anger, his humiliation. And I just listened. I didn't offer solutions. I didn't tell him to update his resume. I just walked beside him, my steps now steady and sure on the sand, and I listened. I let the sound of the waves wash over his words, carrying away some of the poison. When he finally fell silent, we just stood there, watching the tide go out, revealing the shells and stones and secrets of the seabed. "Thank you, Mom," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "I don't know what I would have done if I couldn't come here. This house," I said, putting my arm through his. "It's a haven, remember? It's not just for peace and quiet. It's a place to fall apart and know you'll be safe. It's a place to find yourself again when you get lost." He left the next day. He wasn't fixed. He wasn't magically healed. The road ahead of him was still long and difficult. But something in him had shifted. The desperate, hollow look in his eyes was gone, replaced by a glimmer of his old resolve. He was leaving with a new map, one that showed him his own intrinsic value, separate from any job title or salary. As I watched his car disappear down the road, I felt a profound sense of peace. The final piece of the puzzle had clicked into place. I had bought this house to retire, to be quiet, to be still. But life had surprised me. It had brought chaos, it had brought pain, it had brought struggle. And through it all, it had brought the greatest gifts. It had given me back my son, not as a dependent child or as a controlling caretaker, but as an equal, a friend. It had taught me my own strength in a way I never could have learned in a life of ease. I walked back inside and sat down in Arthur's chair. The house was quiet again. But it was a new silence, deeper and more meaningful than ever before. It was filled with the echoes of every lesson, every tear, every moment of grace. The ultimate surprise wasn't the crowd my son had brought. It wasn't the surprise I planned for him, or the shock of my fall. The ultimate surprise was the life that had unfolded here, in this small house by the sea. It was a life far richer, more challenging, and more beautiful than the simple dream I had started with. My haven had become a home in the truest sense of the word, not just a shelter from the storm, but a lighthouse, a place that held a steady, unwavering light for those I loved, and for myself to find our way home. And in the quiet hum of the universe, I could almost hear Arthur whisper, "This, my love. This was the plan all along."